Hello, my name is Lee Kofman. I'm an Israeli-Australian author and editor of 8 books. I also teach writing and I mentor writers. So the reason I'm mentioning the letter is because I'm going to read today from my most recent book, which is all about writing. It's called The Writer Laid Bare. So this book arose from a blog which I've been writing for, I think, maybe 10 or 12 years. I can't even remember anymore. It started as a blog that I was writing for Writers Victoria, and then I started blogging privately on my website as well. So I have a long-standing interest in how the writing process works, tricks of craft, what it takes generally to live a life of a writer. And I've been writing about all that. And in 2019, my publisher, Jane Curry from Ventura Press, asked me to write a book based on this blog. And initially I was very excited, but then I actually got quite anxious about this whole thing because my blog is a really kind of whimsical creature. It has lots of different types of posts. It has listicles, humorous kind of satirical posts about what it's like to be a writer. It has serious posts about all sorts of topics, but it's a real mishmash. So when I thought hard and long, how am I going to bring all that sort of stuff into a book, I realized that I started thinking about why I actually started blogging. And I started blogging at the time when I was coming to an end of my 4-year long writer's block. I felt really blocked at the time, and when I thought about that time when I was blocked, I realized that most of my issues at the time were related to emotional honesty. I just was not honest on the page enough. I wasn't honest enough in my process and how I generally approached writing. And I thought, I love so much books on writing. Some of them more than others. I'm not crazy about the how to do sort of 5 steps to writing your bestseller writing books, but I love more kind of heartfelt writing, inspirational, you can call, though I kind of cringe at the word. So I wanted to really write a kind of book that I didn't have at the time, and I was blocked about the role of emotional honesty in a writer's life. I'm just thinking now, if I had a book like this when I was blocked, maybe I wouldn't have been blocked for so many years. Maybe I would have sort of got my act together quicker. So I'm going to read from the very start of the book, the prologue called Into the Flames. Every now and then, I get a particularly cheerful student in my writing class. While everyone else bemoans the ginormous, as my children are fond of saying, effort that writing requires, this student will sit back, smile mysteriously, or perhaps incredulously. At some point, they will raise their hand to tell us, not so much smugly as rather innocently, that writing is a sheer joy for them. That whenever they sit at a computer or open a notebook, or nowadays a voice recorder, the words just pour out of them, as if of their own accord. This is the one student, however, I'm sorry to report, who is usually made of the least writerly material, as my once jealous class inevitably discovers when they begin sharing their works. Writing is meant to be difficult. Many writers, I'm sure, would nod vigorously at Thomas Mann's famous suggestion that writers are those for whom writing is more difficult than for other people. Writers understand the weight of words, and this understanding weighs on us. We know that each minute choice we make matters, that to express something truthfully and vividly is a feat. We know that writing that emerges with the greatest ease is often cliched, unattuned to nuance. As Philip Roth said, when you are writing, you are looking for what is going to resist you. You are looking for trouble. It is no wonder then that for many of us, writing is foremost an act of self-doubt, a breeding ground for self-loathing, a boot camp. That's why writers are more likely to be nervous wrecks than wise philosophers calmly observing reality, as I assumed during my teenage years. On the other hand, our neuroses tend to be of the perfectionist kind. As such, they make our work better. Or as the best-selling American novelist James M. Cain put it, If a writer doesn't lie awake at night worrying about their work, the reader isn't going to either. There are difficulties and there are difficulties, however. The most painful as well as dangerous to our art, I believe, are the difficulties associated with emotional honesty. The times when we lose touch with our viscera, with how we perceive ourselves and the outer world, or when we are reluctant to share what we find there. I am speaking from experience. There was a time, just after I turned 30, when I grew so despondent about my writing that I made up a word to describe what was wrong with it: non-honesty. To say that my works were dishonest didn't feel right, because they didn't contain outright lies, but they emanated a subtler sting, one more difficult to get rid of. I sinned more by omission than commission. There wasn't enough honesty in my prose. What I mean is that I airbrushed whatever I wrote, fiction or creative non-fiction. I smoothed the edges of even mildly controversial topics, and I skimmed only the surface of my characters' minds. Does she love him or not? He is a loner because he had a difficult childhood. I failed to explore the ambivalences and gradations inherent in romantic love, like she may love him a little and need him a lot, or that a solitary nature is likely to be formed by a mix of factors, so is he also an introvert with a rich inner world? I wasn't sufficiently in touch with the complexity of human thoughts and emotions. Or, as the editor of my then latest book put it in an email, you've taken your readers on a fascinating tour through the main streets of your novel, but forgone visiting the hidden alleys. Some of my honesty was habitual, an extension of my personality. In real life too, I often try to tidy up the mess of the human condition. Just recently, when the mother of my children's school asked where my accent was from, I automatically said Israel instead of explaining that it's a mixed Russian-Israeli accent. I was born in Russia and moved to Israel as a teenager. Still, as a young writer, I had times when I was more vigilant about my honest tendencies, and had more courage too. A book of short stories I had written before that novel was uncomfortable and probing. It examined the poor choices otherwise decent people make to plagiarize another's work, betray a friend, commit violence. I wrote those stories because I was possessed by them, and I wanted to exorcise them from my system. I didn't really believe anyone would publish them, so it was easier to write as Jonathan Franzen thinks writers should. I'm quoting, like a firefighter whose job while everyone else is fleeing the flames is to run straight into them. But at 30, more published and more self-conscious, I was no firefighter. Assuming this time that what I wrote was likely to be read, I felt more exposed and frightened to say things that are not usually said in a polite society. On top of that, at the time I was a recent arrival in Australia and in the process of changing countries and languages. I had lost touch with my gut. Being self-aware is always hard work, or at least it is for me. However, I struggled even more during those years when I had just begun writing in English. In a language not yet embedded in me viscerally, I found it harder to unpick my feelings and experiences into their molecular components. And if I wasn't sensitive to my own complexities, how could I have the insight to describe those of others, be they fictional or real? How could I reflect meaningfully on others' anxieties, their idiosyncrasies, biases, conflicting desires, if I couldn't properly analyze my own? Creative writers of any genre are at their best when they continuously study themselves and their perceptions of the world, when they cultivate what I think of as hyper self-awareness, as well as hyper courage, in order to describe their findings truthfully. But during my non-honesty period, I was nowhere near ready to do anything of the kind. I craved publication and recognition as an author in Australia so much that I worked to please more than to say something authentic. Funnily enough, this was actually antithetical to my dream of recognition, as it is the writing that endangers us that has the best chance of moving readers. So this is really what this excerpt that I read, it really shows you the impetus of what sort of drove this book, which ended up having a subtitle, Mastering Emotional Honesty in a Writer's Art, Craft and Life. Thank you for listening to me.